Now, you know, for a lot of viewers who come from different parts of the world where grain farming isn't such a thing, you may actually wonder what these things are. I mean, I just always assume, having grown up in the prairies, that everyone understands grain elevators, but knowing that's not the case, let me just give you a quick overview of their function and how they work in general. So grain elevators serve two main purposes. The first is serving as a grain storage facility, and the second is to facilitate the transfer of grain from trucks onto rail cars to then be shipped out to the various ports. So while on this one, the driveway is long since gone, you can see over there, or maybe not because it's blown out, but if I back up, you can basically see this portion of the grain elevator is a drive-through area. So trucks would come in, drive up into this section of the grain elevator, and then lift their hoists and dump their grain into the pit. So the pit would be down underneath the driveway in this area here. And the other part, of course, of that is that there is a scale. They weigh the truck when it comes in, they weigh the truck after it has dumped its load of grain, and that is how they determine how much grain the farmer has brought into the elevator. And then samples of the grain are taken as it's dumped so that it can be graded. And based on the weight and the grade, the farmer would get paid for his crop. This building here would be the combination grain handling agent's office and engine room. The engine would actually, if I can walk over here without stepping on any nails, would drive these pulleys and a belt system that would run under this walkway and over to the main elevator. And inside the elevator, there is a long vertical shaft with a conveyor belt with buckets on it called the leg. Okay, back on this side to give you another look at the driveway. This side of the driveway is a little more accessible. So as I said, trucks would pull in here. And this gives you a good look at that pit underneath the driveway. And you can see how this section here is actually sort of floating, and this is the scale that they used. The actual mechanical part of the scale with the counterweights and things would have been over here along this bench and located on this section of the floor. In fact, I can see these holes in the floor where it would have been mounted. And this is a great look at the conveyor belt and the buckets that run up into the leg. So this shaft here, being the leg, basically runs the entire height of the elevator, and the conveyor belt, being driven by that engine, is able to scoop the grain out of the pit and run it up to the top of the elevator, where it is set into different bins for storage purposes. And I can give you a look. That's looking up the leg straight to the top of the elevator. This is a man lift here with this rope. So that was one way that the grain engine could get up to the top. And the other way would be to climb this ladder. Not a fun prospect for if you're afraid of heights. Now the wheel is gone on this one. But you can see there's a foot pedal or a lever here that the operator would use with his foot that is attached to this cable, and it also runs up to the very top of the elevator. And it controls the... Okay, so I can't remember the technical term for the auger kind of thing that sits at the top and spins, but by pressing down on that wooden foot pedal, it lifts the chute out of the hole. The grain operator could use a giant wheel and actually spin that chute around to pick which bin it would drop grain into, and then by releasing the foot pedal it would drop the rotating selector device, whose name I forgot, into the appropriate bin. So then as the grain runs up the leg, it comes through the top of that piece, down the chute into the appropriate bin, where it would be stored until it was time to load it onto a train car. So there is another scale that would have been located over in this area, and you can see all of these different chutes come down from the various grain bins, and they are selected using these wooden levers that are coming down. So by pulling a lever, the operator could open and close individual grain bins. The grain would then run down into this hopper here, which was set on another scale, so they could weigh how much grain was going out. From there, the process would essentially repeat. It would go from this hopper back in to the pit, run up the leg into another chute that is set, that actually comes out of the building and down the side, where it would go into a waiting train car. So I'm sure I didn't explain that as well as some people could, and it's a pretty rudimentary explanation of things, but it gives you a really good idea, I think, of how these grain elevators operated. And you can see here, this is the chute that would have come down from way up top. The grain would then come out of there into the loading, or into the cars that were waiting to be loaded. Now, the siding track that would have come off of this main line is long since gone from here, but where we're standing would have been a train track at some time, where the waiting cars would have been staged while waiting to be loaded. Now, if grain elevators were just pure infrastructure, they'd still be kind of interesting. But they also have a very important cultural significance to life on the prairies. The grain elevators were stationed every 6 to 10 miles along the train tracks, mainly because that was sort of the maximum distance a farmer could be expected to haul grain with horse-drawn wagons. So they were spaced out very frequently, and they were often used as homecoming beacons. In the days before GPS, before detailed road maps, you could tell where you were based on the grain elevator, because every grain elevator had the name of the grain company and the town blazoned on the side. So they were important for navigation purposes in those early days. But they were also very significant from a cultural perspective. Being the tallest and most significant building in most of these towns, they really served as a gathering point for communities. This was where all the local farmers would be coming to deposit their grain. This is where they would get the local news. These buildings were often the first buildings in a community to even have a working telephone. So it was literally the hub of the community. And if you put yourself back in the mindset of an early 20th century farmer, pioneer, settler, it's really hard to overstate the importance of these grain elevators to the communities of that time. And that's why, as they've started to disappear, obviously as trucks became bigger, an elevator like this could not handle a B train loaded with grain. There's just not enough room in the driveway. As trucks became better and could travel longer distances more reliably, they didn't need to have a grain elevator every 6 to 10 miles. So the grain companies naturally got rid of them. They're expensive to maintain, they are a severe fire hazard, and there's a lot of liability involved. So grain companies have been getting rid of them. We're down to a few hundred left now, where there used to be thousands, and they're a real prairie icon that has disappeared from the landscape for the most part. So seeing ones like this still somewhat intact is getting to be a harder and harder thing to do.